All right, there are a million things I want to talk about, but literally right before we went live, you said, yeah, 25% Nico Collins. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a pretty simple case for me with Nico Collins. I mean, at the end of the day, this was an elite graded receiver last year. 8 receivers in the last 15 years have posted both a 3.0 yards per route run and over 300 routes ran in that stretch. Two of them were actually this past year with Brandon Aiyuk, with Nico Collins. The other guys on that list are like Julio Jones, Cooper Kupp. We're talking about rarefied air, not to mention, I mean, the reception perception, he checked that box off. Obviously, the elite offensive situation there with CJ Stroud entering his second year. He's one of the few quarterbacks that, if we said after the year, this quarterback A versus quarterback B threw over 35 touchdowns and 4,500 yards, CJ Stroud would be one of the 5 to 7 guys you'd put on that list. So with Nico Collins, I think he's an ascending superstar talent. And quite frankly, I believe in the ceiling of this offense potentially being a top 3 to 5 unit. Hence why I'm grabbing so much Nico.
So does that mean that you aren't taking Diggs or Dell if you're that excited about Collins?
So I'm taking less comparatively. The reason being is when I'm looking at the roles of their offense, Nico Collins' role as that boundary X wide receiver feels the most intact comparatively. Again, they're going to run a lot of 11 personnel anyways. You don't trade for Stephon Diggs, have Tank Dell, have Nico Collins without the plan of becoming a more pass-heavy 11 personnel team. But when we're actually looking at the role, Nico Collins last year, about 80% of his sample droughts actually came on the boundary. And not to mention just characteristically 6'4", 220-pound X-style wide receiver, very, very good against man, very, very good against press. I just think stylistically he profiles into that position. And not to mention, like I said, if CJ Stroud were to have that outlier touchdown year, I view Nico Collins as being the most likely recipient of the 12 plus, 13 plus touchdowns in that regard.
Yeah. Obviously, this is like one of the toughest spots to figure out at wide receiver this year. This and the Packers. Yeah. Like I made an entire video just looking at the teams that have the elite level quarterbacks, but the wide receivers, it's hard to nail down exactly how to rank them and what the gap is. So back at the end of April, I had Diggs ranked ahead of Collins for this season. And that was before I really started diving deep and making things for the draft guide. And it's funny that you mentioned yards per route run, because as soon as I looked at the intended air yards for Tank Dell and the yards per route run for Nico Collins, I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, he's the third best talent at this point, Stephon Diggs.
Yeah, I mean, because my gut reaction, to be completely honest with you, is so when Stroud broke out last season and Stroud solidified himself, I mean, he was an MVP candidate as a rookie, the best rookie quarterback I've ever seen. And I don't even think it's been close either.
Yeah.
I was of the belief that because of what we had previously seen from these receivers, specifically Nico Collins, that Stroud was elevating the overall offense more than Tank Dell actually being a great rookie, more than Nico Collins actually being one of the best receivers we've seen in the past 5 seasons, But diving in and looking at the intended air yards for Tank Dell, looking at the yards per route run for Nico, I do think I have to walk that back a bit and just acknowledge the fact that, they're pretty damn good receivers. I still am hesitant with Stephon Diggs coming in just because I don't know what the realistic target share is. Because my thing with Nico Collins is, why was he so bad with Davis Mills? You know what I mean? Why did he do absolutely nothing? Because we've seen other wide receivers that were elite level talents. Obviously, I'm not expecting Nico Collins to be a top 12 wide receiver. Davis Mills, I understand that's unrealistic. But why isn't he a top 36 guy?
So I will say contextually coming into the NFL, obviously I watched him a good amount when he was at the University of Michigan, late 3rd round pick at the time.
I forgot he was a Michigan guy.
Hey, go blue, go blue. Yeah. So with Nico Collins, he always had a ton of talent. It's just, it was about refining that talent. And we saw even this past year, for example, the separation metrics were the ones that really, really took my eyes. Because again, 6'4", 220 pounds, we expect him to be this, efficient ball winner down the field. But what really clicked for him from a refinement standpoint, from a route running standpoint this year, blossomed him into the ceiling that everybody really envisioned. Because again, if you look at his production profile at Michigan, you can make the case him even going on day 2 was totally based on the upside case. Because I think at Michigan, never passed over 750 receiving yards. Obviously, at that time, Shea Patterson. There was a whole bunch of quarterback uncertainty at Michigan going through that time. Comes in the NFL, again, late round 3 player. Maybe took him a couple years, but Now at 25 years old, posting the efficiency that he did. Again, I mentioned the reception perception, but 94th percentile against man, 96th percentile against press. And Hayden Winks actually brought up this stat too. But in terms of just pure man coverage composite rank, PFF grade, targets per route run, yards per route run, first downs per route run, he ranks second in the league to CD Lamb. So for me, it's a lot similar to the case for a guy like Brandon Aiyuk, where I just think they're superstar talents. And although there's a lot of target competition, they're going to be great offenses. So I just want to take elite talents on good offenses. Is basically oversimplifying it, if that makes sense.
It definitely makes sense. And now that you mention him, we just got news today that Aiyuk has officially requested a trade. So I'm going to let you know, I have taken a lot of Brandon Aiyuk.
Yeah.
And I am terrified because if you look at like the most likely landing spots, he's already mentioned Washington. Washington would be an absolute disaster.
Yeah.
From a real life perspective, it's great, but from a fantasy football perspective, then the other spots are Pittsburgh, Carolina. So talk me off the ledge of just assuming that Brandon Aiyuk a month from now is going to be going a round or two later in drafts.
Well, the main combatant to that is obviously the offense provides a ton of value there with San Francisco, a top projected offense. Don't get me wrong, but I would argue he had a 23% target share when all the 49ers weapons were healthy. And that's still about equalized to 6.5 targets per game. This is the type of guy that, in my opinion, in the right situation, whether it's Pittsburgh, whether it's Washington, he's got top 5 to 8 overall wide receiver talent in the league that I would argue the offset in offensive efficiency would also be met with the fact that he could just flat out be a 28 to 30% target share type of player.
So let's just go through this hypothetical.
Yep.
Let's say Aiyuk is dealt to, let's call it Washington, because that's where all the buzz has been.
Yeah.
Would you rather have Aiyuk or Adams in that instance?
I would rather Aiyuk, and the reason being, I was actually diving in. If you guys, this is posted on Flock, right?
Yeah, we're going to post it on Flock. I'll probably post it on YouTube behind the paywall as well.
Okay, sounds good. I was just going to say, basically in my CGL series, my truth series, where I dive into any contextual patterns that we can find from a player's season and kind of project forward. Again, even when you're isolating to games that Aiden O'Connell started, because Adams was objectively worse when Jimmy Garoppolo was a starter. Adams was really disappointing from an efficiency standpoint. Obviously, the volume was there. Again, 33+% target share with Aiden O'Connell on the field. If I actually pull up the profile right now, 36.18 receiving yards market share. The thing, though, 1.883 yards per route run, his worst in quite a while in his career. 16.27 PPR points per game, wide receiver 12. Again, he feels like a safe bet to be relatively in the wide receiver 10 to wide receiver 16 range. But the big pause that I have with Davante Adams at this point is that he is becoming an older wide receiver. He did show a little bit of an evident drop off this past season, where if that 33% target share gets touched at all, again, 171 targets last year, absolute volume king this past season. If that were to get touched at all, does that wide receiver 12 now become a wide receiver 16? Like, I don't really see a path for Davante Adams being a top 5 wide receiver like he was a couple years ago.
Yeah, the only way that happens is if the Raiders completely, if Gardner makes you somehow great, but I'm not expecting that to be the case either. So in that instance, Aiyuk's in Washington. Because my big thing is right now, if you look at the implied team totals for Vegas sportsbooks at the moment, the Niners this season are projected to be the number 1 offense in the NFL, and it's not even close either. They're projected to score 26 points per game. And if you go ahead and look at where Washington's at about 20 points per game. I mean, if they get Aiyuk, maybe you bump it up a point or two, half a point. I don't know exactly how much Aiyuk's worth. But nonetheless, you're going from the projected best offense in the league to bottom 10 offense. So in that scenario, would you rather have Aiyuk or Waddle?
I think Waddle's a more interesting conversation because I kind of went through it. Again, we went through our whole second round actually the day we're recording this, and Waddle feels like such a safe pick. The only issue is that obviously with Tyreek there, he'll never have the full wide receiver 1 overall volume on that team. But if you actually look at the splits when he was healthy, when Hill was healthy, when Tua was healthy these last couple of years, he's basically hovered around that wide receiver 7 to wide receiver 14 mark. Washington situation, again, I would have to have time to fully consider just how much of a talent Brandon Aiyuk is versus how negative a situation it would be. But I think Jalen Waddle range would probably be about appropriate. He'd probably drop from an early second round valuation where I have Brandon Aiyuk currently, 203, 204 area to probably around the 209, 210.
Okay, so really, because right now his ADP on Underdog is 19.
I'm smashing him there.
Okay, he's going right before Adams. He's going right before Waddle, right before Debo. So it almost doesn't matter if he's dealt. You are. Let me see how much Aiyuk I have. Yeah, I have 9% Aiyuk just in 2024 drafts. If I look at the eliminator, I think I'm in double-digit percentages. Yeah, I have 20% Aiyuk in the eliminator. But anyway, I'm hoping that Aiyuk doesn't fall too much. I just think that I would see Aiyuk fall to being a third-round pick if he gets dealt out of San Francisco.
I hope
But I
so.
mean, is there any shot that he goes to Buffalo or the Chargers?
I have a hard time saying so. The reason being is that we saw the Bills this offseason, especially with their defense, a couple of their linemen. Sorry. We've seen the Bills this offseason kind of cut their spending, and I don't know how trading for Brandon Aiyuk, who's wanting $30 to $33 million per year, would solve that issue. And on the Chargers point, again, they had the opportunity to take a rookie cost-controlled Malik Neighbors at 5th overall. Again, maybe, they view Joe Alt as a generational tackle, which is why they would make the case to take him over a guy like Malik Neighbors at that spot. But to me, if you were to get an elite wide receiver talent, why wouldn't you have just taken it in the draft?
Okay. So essentially the take here is even
Pittsburgh
if
seems likely.
Yeah, even if Aiyuk's dealt, while the efficiency goes down, the market share goes up, and he still remains as a second-round pick in underdog drafts.
Yeah, but so again, I can see his ADP value going down because obviously the attachment to the 49ers offense, obviously the stacking probabilities there with Jahmyr Gibbs, Amon St. Brown, that doesn't really exist to be the case. Obviously, we know the week 17 correlator that everybody on underdog abides by. Detroit versus San Francisco, one of those prime week 17 spots. So I can see without the attachment to that week 17 correlation, he could possibly fall to the early third round. And the other guy I would mention, for example, obviously if Brandon Aiyuk gets dealt, that just means inversely that Deebo Samuel's value would also go up. So I can see them maybe even swapping ADPs. Deebo Samuel's like the 211 right now. I can maybe see him becoming an early to mid second round pick, whereas Brandon Aiyuk kind of settles at his spot.
If Aiyuk was dealt, I would move Deebo ahead of Waddle, ahead of Adams, ahead of Aiyuk, I would move him ahead of Nico, ahead of Olave.
Be close to Garrett.
I would have Deebo Samuel at the 1-2 turn, specifically in underdog drafts. Regular redraft leagues, you don't need to take wide receivers that early. But yeah, I think Deebo would be an early second round pick, like wide receiver 11, wide receiver 12. But what do you think about? I call him Sticky Ricky. No reason for it. Said it once in the live stream. So right now, wide receiver 67. I assume if Aiyuk's dealt, he jumps Leggett, he jumps Dotson, he jumps Polk, he jumps Davis, Downs, Mike Williams, Jerry Jeudy, Wicks, AD Mitchell, Myers, Cooks. This is for me. You stop me where
I agree.
Shakir, Dobbs, Shaheed, Palmer. I think he goes to Sutton.
Palmer is about the cutoff, I would say, probably around that range. But I mean, obviously the valuation there, if Brandon Aiyuk and his 25% target share is out of the building, like I understand, obviously George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel still exist, but this is still a first round NFL capital wide receiver. I currently have about 8.3% drafted percentage with the assumption that Brandon Aiyuk would be staying on the 49ers. But with the new news, maybe I have to up that percentage because I do feel like you said, he would probably become a 10th, 11th round pick if that were the case.
Oh, definitely. It's been interesting too because he has actually been falling over the past few weeks.
Crazy.
But the last thing with the Niners situation, I think that this is probably easy to say, at least for me. George Kittle jumps Pitts.
Yeah, if that happened, absolutely.
Does George Kittle jump either Kincaid or Andrews?
I honestly think it's a close call right now. So if Brandon Aiyuk is out of the building, I think you can make the case he's tight end 3, tight end 4. Like I think he'd be right in line with like Trey McBride.
Okay. So essentially right now, if you can still get Kittle in round 6 and you think Aiyuk's gone, if Aiyuk is gone, he goes from middle of round 6 to the 4-5 turn.
Pretty much. The way I view George Kittle right now is he's already a really good pick where he's going, but with the implied upside that Brandon Aiyuk gets dealt, he probably should be around above where he's going.
Okay. And then regarding Purdy, I think Purdy's a great value as is QB 12, pick 112. I think it would have to hurt him. The only instance where it doesn't hurt him is if they get extra flexibility, they're able to somehow parlay that into improving a very good offensive line already. It would be stretching it to try to make it seem like it's not bad for Purdy. So in that instance, does Purdy fall below either Caleb or Lawrence with where he's currently going?
So I actually have Caleb as my quarterback 11 right now. I just view
Okay.
the overall surrounding talent, his ability to improvise. Again, I am high on Caleb Williams. For the record, again, I'm about in line with Purdy right now. I just have the 2 rookie quarterbacks slightly above. However, with the context that potentially Brandon Aiyuk would get moved, hypothetically, if he does get moved, you're probably looking at, you'd have to take Tua, you'd have to take Jared Goff. I think the debate would start, like you said, Lawrence Herbert area.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Because if I'm looking at it, it just comes down to like how many projected points do you think the Niners offense would lose with no Aiyuk? I just simply don't know the answer to that question. But I think you could make an argument that if Ayuk's gone, it's going to be a very high scoring offense, great offensive line, but they're going to score a lot of points running the football.
Yeah.
And we know Purdy's not really going to run the ball himself. So what's the difference between Purdy and Tua or Purdy and Goff? At that point, they're kind of the same guy, you know?
That's kind of where I get back to as well. Speaking specifically about Brandon Aiyuk in terms of the contextual fit in the offense, he is their main man coverage beater. So straight up, when Purdy does not have Brandon Aiyuk on the field, I severely question how exactly they're going to do from a separation standpoint. I feel like personally, Brandon Aiyuk, outside of Christian McCaffrey, of course, with the touch workload he gets, is the glue of that passing attack, to be honest. Brandon Aiyuk, 3-level threat, man beater. If you don't have that type of player in your wide receiver core, again, I like Ricky Pearsall, but saying he's just going to automatically assume the Brandon Aiyuk role, I think he'd be more suited to actually assume the Deebo Samuel role if Deebo were to get moved or hurt more than it would be the Brandon Aiyuk role.
This was actually my next question. Is there any shot they pull the reverse Uno card, send away Deebo? Because I do think that Ricky's a better replacement for Deebo than he is Aiyuk.
Yeah, I personally think Brandon Aiyuk is more irreplaceable in that offense than Deebo Samuel. And knowing that you have to pay one or the other high wide receiver market value. Again, I don't know what Deebo's current contract is. You can let me know, but I know Brandon Aiyuk is probably going to make between $30 to $32 million, maybe even 33 given the market. I mean, it really just depends with Brandon Aiyuk because in my opinion, outside of, I think the top 5 wide receivers talent-wise in the NFL right now are Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, and A.J. Brown. Outside of those 5, you can make the very well case that Brandon Aiyuk is the number 6 overall wide receiver talent in the league.
Yeah, Deebo's getting paid this season $28 million.
Yeah, I would much rather trade that contract than trade away Brandon Aiyuk.
Yeah. To be fair, obviously, you'd probably get a little more for Aiyuk, but
yeah,
still the point.
Much more.
Okay, now the next player I got to ask you about. Currently, I mean, before the DUI, wide receiver 39 on an underdog. I know that because I was drafting a ridiculous amount of him. He was my most drafted guy at wide receiver 39. Thought it was a great price.
Yeah.
Please tell me Jordan Addison does not miss time this season.
Yeah, it's tough to say. Again, Drew Davenport on Twitter would probably give you the best rundown in terms of the overall legal situation. I don't really necessarily know the true details, nor do I think the details have quite come out yet, but it's not a great look, man. You got a DUI last offseason. Your teammate just literally passed away this offseason, and you go out and have another DUI, man. Like, I don't know if that speaks to his character. I don't know if that speaks to maybe something going on mentally. I don't know what the case is, but it's flat out inexcusable.
Oh yeah, no, this is I said this on the live stream a couple nights ago, and I understand that it's a take that nobody should agree. Nobody will agree with me on, and I'm not expecting people to, which is fine. It's like a outlandish, like personal take.
Yeah.
But if I am 21 years old and my job is to simply do 2 things: 1, to take care of my body the best that I can, and 2, to not make stupid decisions. And if I do those 2 things well and I rise to the cream of the crop and I'm one of the best receivers in the NFL, I get a $100 million contract. Don't drink for 4 years. Be sober for 4 years. Much easier said than done, I understand, for people.
Or get a fucking Uber.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously that's the easiest point, but yeah, it's just brutal because now I'm assuming you're going Ladd over Addison, right?
Yeah, so I had him wide receiver 38. Funny you mentioned Ladd. I have Ladd wide receiver 39. With the news, I think I would honestly probably take Rashee Rice over him at this point.
Oh yeah, you have, because Rice is a suspension concern, but he has Mahomes.
Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
Like, Honestly, he'd probably have to go down a tier. I honestly think the cutoff would be probably wide receiver 47. I'm not a big JMO guy, so I'd probably have him slightly above Jameson Williams because I don't think Jameson Williams will command that type of volume going into this year, despite obviously the offensive insulation there in Detroit. So you would go from probably wide receiver 38 to wide receiver 46 area.
That was literally my exact take. Is I move him behind, and I'm just looking at ADP right now, not rankings.
Yeah,
I move him behind Ladd, Christian Watson, Deontay Johnson, Brian Thomas, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, and Keon Coleman. I'd rather have Keon now.
and I would make the case of DeAndre Hopkins. Again, Terry McLaurin goes a little bit higher, but I have him a little bit lower via my ratings. And I mean, Keon Coleman would also be the other one, like you said. So
Yeah, no, DeAndre Hopkins has already jumped Addison and ADP. And we'll talk about Terry. Let's circle back to Terry in a second, because I think Terry's super interesting based off price. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there are two guys I really want to talk about here. So I agree. I think Addison falls behind all those guys and is about wide receiver 47. I'm still going to take him over Jameson Williams. I'm going to take him over Cortland Sutton, because who cares? It's Jameson Williams and Cortland Sutton. But two guys I want to talk about. One, while we still are somewhat on the Brandon Aiyuk topic, is there a worse ADP right now than Terry McLaurin going at the 4-5 turn? Okay, this is my favorite Terry McLaurin stat. I say this every year, and it continues to remain true. All I have to do is add a number to it. Terry McLaurin's going to turn 29 in 2 months, and he's never finished as higher than the wide receiver 20.
He's never finished higher than wide receiver 20. He's had 1 year of over 5 receiving touchdowns, and he's never crossed 1,200 receiving yards, but we're taking him at the 4-5 turnover actual upside bets.
Yeah, it's like my thing with McLaurin is I think it's just simply he doesn't really generate a ton of separation. He wins at the catch point, and that looks really fancy on the TV screen. When you watch highlights, he looks great. When Madden puts out their ratings, they go, okay, yeah, no, Terry McLaurin, great guy. We're going to rank him at 90 or whatever the hell they do. You know what I mean? So I think people have it in their heads that, oh, Terry McLaurin's an elite level receiver, which he's not. I don't see any metric that points to the fact that he is. And he has a rookie quarterback that's going to be a rushing quarterback. This projects out to be one of the worst offenses in the NFL. And now you have the possibility of a real alpha coming in. Like, it's like, yeah. It's funny that you bring up Terry McLaurin like next to Jordan Addison, because that's where I would have had him ranked before the DUI. But instead he's going literally, he's going ahead of Josh Jacobs, Patrick Mahomes, Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid. Like, Mark Andrews and Kincaid, in my mind, outscore him, and they're at tight end, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually baffling where Terry McLaurin's currently going in drafts, and it's funny you mentioned his name. What did you say his ADP was?
His ADP is 48 at the moment.
He may or may not be my 74th overall player, and that's about where I think he should be ranked. Again, he's my wide receiver 45 currently. I understand people will see, oh, the Cowboys jerseys, of course, he's hating on the Commanders player. If I were to ask you right now, over under 19 and a half passing touchdowns from Jaden Daniels, you're taking the under, right?
Passing touchdowns, obviously total touchdowns give me the over. Passing touchdowns, probably the under.
And this is a player that hasn't had over 1,200 rushing yard or receiving yards. Hasn't had, like we said, over 5 touchdowns since his rookie season. And the quarterback play isn't expected to carry over the top, a la maybe an Aaron Rodgers optimistic case or a Kirk Cousins optimistic case. Like, no, you are getting a rookie run first quarterback here.
Yeah, I literally just pulled up Jaden Daniels' underdog pick'ems. He's at 19 and a half passing touchdowns and 3,100 passing yards.
Good guess.
3,100 passing yards.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, Jaden Daniels himself can be great because he can run the ball, but it doesn't mean you have to take McLaurin ahead of Mark Andrews. But another receiver, I mean, this is what I want to do. I'm sorry that we didn't have a better structured thing. I just want to.
I like it.
Keon Coleman, hated him as a prospect. Obviously, the landing spot's nuts. I tweeted this out a couple weeks ago, but do you remember in underdog drafts a few years back when people were taking Gabe Davis, who had no shot to be the wide receiver 1 in Buffalo, who had a big playoff game that was a day 3 draft pick,
round 3-4 pick.
They were taking him at the 3-4 turn. Now Keon Coleman has a shot to be the wide receiver 1 in Buffalo. I didn't like him as a prospect, but is essentially a round 1 NFL draft pick. He goes to pick 33, and his ADP is wide receiver 47.
Yeah, it's actually baffling. I have him slightly higher than ADP right now. I mentioned earlier, wide receiver 43 on my board. And that's with actually liking the other two wide receivers. Like I have Khalil Shakir 49, Curtis Samuel 50. I think it's a relatively ambiguous room, but at the end of the day, he gets the 33rd overall draft capital. And I actually did like him as a prospect. I thought he
Mhm.
was an unrefined player, but the natural talent, the ability to win at the catch point, the underrated yak ability, I do feel like he has the potential to develop into the wide receiver one on this team. Now, is he going to step in day one and automatically be a 8+, 9+ target per game type of player? Not necessarily, but at the same time, he does have spike week appeal. He does have a natural red zone ability. Again, is it going to be the most consistent year from him in year one? Probably not. He's going to hit his learning curve. But at the same time, when we're drafting in best ball, I get potentially the wide receiver one for Josh Allen when the wide receiver two for Josh Allen, like you said, with Gabe Davis, was probably even more unproven other than one playoff game and was going at the 3-4 turn 2 years ago.
And looking at the other receivers in this, like, because I completely understand if someone wants to go, ooh, I like Curtis Samuel as a sneaky sleeper.
Yeah.
But just like looking at the profiles in comparison, and people always get so mad when I throw out numbers like this and acting as if I don't know the context behind it, acting as if I didn't know Curtis Samuel was a Panther and then a Commander. Now he's a Bill.
Yeah.
You know, they're going,
Yeah.
oh, but Josh Allen's. But anyway, Curtis Samuel's one season in his NFL career where he averaged more than 9.0 fantasy points per game, and he's going into year 8.
That was what,
You know,
2020?
yeah,
Yeah.
2020 averaged 11 and a half fantasy points
Yeah.
per game. But outside of that, I mean, only one season where he eclipsed over 9.0. And I'm completely fine calling him a sleeper and all. But the thing is, he goes one round after Keon Coleman. So it's like,
Yeah.
why am I taking that profile if the discount I'm getting is a single round compared to the young guy that has the size for touchdown upside that was just drafted pretty much in round 1 of the draft?
On top of that, the market seems so certain that Curtis Samuel is going to be that much better than Khalil Shakir when I would
Yeah.
argue Khalil Shakir was arguably the Bills' best receiver down the stretch, Stephon Diggs included. So
Yeah.
to me, I view Keon Coleman as the one in terms of the wide receivers I'm drafting from this core. And in terms of Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakir, if they were going back to back, I'm like, okay, you want to take Curtis Samuel? Sure. He showed some efficiency, some downfield appeal, but the market's just so certain that he's going to be better than Khalil Shakir that I've just been ending up with a lot of Shakir.
Yeah, that makes sense. In this offense, do you have any hot takes for Kincaid? Because personally, since I don't love the wide receivers here, I'm fine taking a shot on Keon Coleman because he's wide receiver
Yeah.
47. I've been drafting a ton of round 5 Kincaid. Like, I think Kincaid can outscore Hollywood, Keenan Allen, Jaden Reed, and they're in the same round.
I think he can, and it's kind of funny because I actually made the case for with Drake London, where I think Drake London's a stud talent. I think he's a top
Mhm.
15-ish level real life NFL wide receiver talent. But when we were going through the second round, 202 ADP, you basically need him to be an alpha superstar wide receiver to
Yeah.
pay off at that spot. Again, I don't think the threshold's that quite high for Dalton Kincaid having that insulation in that Bills offense. But the main question mark I have Kincaid for is he a fine, tight end 8 to 10, Jake Ferguson level talent, or is he Mark Andrews?
Yeah. So I'm assuming in that point you're taking Andrews over him easily.
Yeah, I would take Andrews. And the one that I'm caught between that really, like, again, these three guys are literally 62, 64, 67 in my rankings. Can't really differentiate between is Kyle Pitts, Dalton Kincaid, George Kittle. I think all of those three have different question marks.
Oh. What? So are you looking at McBride as fundamentally a different tier than these guys?
I would view McBride slightly ahead simply because of the volume profile that he showed down the stretch last year. He
Okay.
also was efficient on it comparatively to Dalton Kincaid. Again, he was getting a lot more volume down the stretch. I mean, other than the last few games where he was getting some goose eggs, I love the Dallas game that I went to live, but he was getting some volume. It's just the unfortunate thing with Kincaid is that he wasn't really that efficient on it versus with
Yeah.
McBride. We saw down the stretch him have legitimate, I think it was 89 yards per game, was an efficient, top 2 tight end down the stretch. And again, obviously Marvin Harrison Jr. there is going to impact the overall target ceiling from him. But I would argue having a legit established wide receiver one along with the health of Kyler Murray improves the overall complexion of the offense. Because Trey McBride was a guy that ran extremely cold in the touchdown department last year. Maybe with Marvin Harrison, Kyler Murray fully healthy, instead of 3 touchdowns, we're looking at maybe a 7 to 9 touchdown player.
Okay. And overall, are you finding yourself taking a lot of these tight ends in this range? Like, are you finding yourself going tight end often around 5, 6?
I usually take so the way I kind of have it right now is actually you mentioned McBride. He's kind of not a tier of his own, but he's closer to this range Andrews, Pitts, Kittle, Kincaid to me than he is Sam Laporta and Travis Kelsey. Travis
Right.
Kelsey actually has been the one I've been getting a ton of because I mean, you know how anti-age I've been. I've talked about, the age curve. I've talked about, I don't want to touch guys that are yay old, but I mean, this guy was so productive last year. Attached to Patrick Mahomes, and he's going in the fourth round now. This is a guy that was being selected 106, 107, 108 in drafts for the last 3 years.
I I've been taking a ton. I've been taking a ton of all these tight ends, literally every single one. The only guy I've been drafting a lot of is Kyle Pitts. But my thought process here, I think this is like an overarching issue that people have specifically with best ball, is I think people will look at what worked the year before and they'll think that they are so smart, so much smarter than the rest of the field. Like how I won the 150,000 on underdog 2 years ago that was the year that everybody and their mom realized, oh, okay, running backs in the middle rounds aren't good. They haven't been good. And now nobody draft running backs in the middle round will let Josh Jacobs go round 8. You know what I mean? And I think people are really bad at looking at what happened the season before, assuming that that is the gospel that is always going to happen going into the future. And what happened last year is early tight end didn't work out. Mark Andrews got hurt. Travis Kelsey was fine, but from a value
Over a replacement standpoint.
exactly. Him going next
Cost.
to Tyreek Hill, no, you're not going to win your league, So early tight end got crushed last season when these guys were going significantly higher. They're in pretty much the same situations, but now you have Sam Laporta going after the wide receiver 26. The first tight end's going off the board, but right before George Pickens. Travis Kelsey's going after George Pickens. You know what I mean? And it's the same thing going over to quarterback where it's just going back and forth. Elite level quarterback crushes. Then last season, people are drafting elite level quarterbacks. I mean, you remember tournaments open up. Josh Allen was a round 1 pick. It was nuts, And last year, because the prices were nuts, they cooled down near the end of the summer, but still, elite quarterback didn't work out. CJ Stroud came out and blew everything open and flipped the slate. And now all of a sudden people think late round quarterback's what we should do because it worked last year. And now Josh Allen goes after the wide receiver 26.
It's remarkable. And like you said, it actually goes to both tight end and quarterback because like you said, the wide receiver thirst is so high, 26 wide receivers in the first 3 rounds. Like, I'm sorry, I like Zay Flowers. I'm not spending the 311 on him. It's just not going to happen, quite frank, especially when you're talking about Travis Kelsey, who legitimately projects better as a wide receiver, goes at the tight end position later on. Doesn't make sense in my brain. Not to mention, like you said, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, legitimate 23, 24 point per game type of scorers last year are going in the 3rd round, are going in the 4th round. Usually actually in the 4th round by ADP, 37.7 for Allen, 41.6 for Hurts. The way I've been approaching both positions is that I've been taking the top of their positions to get the positional advantage. So Allen, Hurts, Laporta, and Kelsey. But because I feel like there's value at all those spots, especially even like you go down to Jordan Love, you go down to Dak Prescott. If I can get Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts where like there's a significant edge, they can give me legitimately 23, 24 points per game. I'm not really been taking a lot of Lamar, Mahomes, Richardson, Stroud, simply because I view their projections kind of similar to that of a Love, a Prescott, a Burrow, even a Kyler Murray, who's going about 80 ADP now. When it started this offseason, Kyler Murray was like closer to 90, 95 because people were very pessimistic. Maybe that obviously the factor there is getting Marvin Harrison Jr. probably propped that up, but I just view the significant tier gap between the top 2 guys versus even the mid tier is larger than the tier gap between quarterback 4 versus quarterback 9 off the board. So for me personally, I've been attacking the top 2 guys a lot. Then once, Lamar, Mahomes, Richardson, Stroud come, that's when I've been taking my wide receivers, trying to make sure I'm filled up, caught up at that position before I have to end up taking Jameson Williams as my wide receiver 3 or 4. So for me, it's like from an opportunity bundle standpoint, would I rather have Lamar Jackson plus Jameson Williams, or would I rather have Dak Prescott plus, I mean, if we're looking at the last receiver here, I mean, actually, it's probably better to view a running back in that range because, to be honest, the wide receivers are kind of misappropriated as a whole. Josh Jacobs, the name you brought up. Isaiah Pacheco, I cannot draft enough of. Travis Etienne, 44 overall. I mean, Travis Etienne literally did exactly what we could have expected him to at the 3-4 turn last year. But because of the depressed running back cost, is going a full round later.
Yeah. And what I'm personally viewing, and I talked to Corey about this, is how I view drafts this year. I think if you look at the quarterback and tight end prices, you can go round by round, and I can say, oh, round 4, Kelsey's an absolute smash. What are the best values in round 4? I'm going to go Josh Allen, Travis Kelce, Isaiah Pacheco.
No wide receivers.
Exactly. Round 5, best values. Maybe Mark Andrews and Lamar when he falls. Josh Jacobs. Round 6, who are the best values? George Kittle. Round 7, who's the best value? I don't know, Kyle. Like, you know what I mean? You're never picking the receiver there for the best value. So I feel like whenever I'm selecting a running back, quarterback, or tight end, it's like having my dessert in these drafts, right? It's like that's what I want. It's not, and I can't only have my desserts. I can't sit here and go running back, tight end, quarterback through the first 4 rounds. And I'm viewing the wide receivers almost as like the vegetables that I'm forced to have to eat, you know? So what I've been doing a ton of is where I don't see like a massive drop off between the expected value of a receiver and a running back is I'm just taking a receiver. So I'm trying to go wide receiver as often as I can in round 1. I'm trying to go wide receiver as often as I can in round 2, just so I can go wide receiver out the gate. And I'm not forced to take Zay Flowers over Laporta. I'm not forced to take George Pickens over Travis Kelce, you know?
I'm so glad you mentioned that. So it's funny that you got your term for it. I've heard actually, I believe the ship chasing dudes refer to it as well. It's kind of like you're taking detours when you don't go with a wide receiver. And I think that's the most applicable thing for this year specifically. I've had the conversation, actually, that exact convo with Corey for the last couple of months since drafts open, is that he wanted, to take more running backs, take more tight ends. I'm like, I get it. I do too. But at the same time, I can't do it early. And that's why I can't rank Christian McCaffrey 101 or 102. That's why I can't rank Bijan Robinson or Breece Hall higher than 107, 108. Because to be honest, if I take any of those running backs, I fall so far behind the wide receiver 8 ball to the point where it's like, yeah, Christian McCaffrey is an elite needle mover at the running back position. But so are Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb at wide receiver. Again, I can't lower him any more than 3rd because he's just such a freak of nature. But I have to take those 2 wide receivers ahead of him if I'm in a 1 draft scenario. Obviously, we're drafting big best ball portfolios. We're going to have a ton of shares of a lot of guys. You may as well just take them at their ADPs anyway, so you make sure you don't have, 2% McCaffrey at the end of the year. Same thing with Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson, where it's like, I love those guys. I want to rank them. I think they have legendary 25+ PPR point per game upside, but if I take them over Chase, Jefferson, and Amon-Ra, who also have a ton of upside at wide receiver, I feel like I'm forfeiting structure later in my drafts. And same thing in the second round. Like I said, that's why I have Nico Collins as my 202 right now. Brandon Aiyuk high. We mentioned, Drake London. I'm fine taking 2 wide receivers off the rip if it gives me more fluidity in the rounds 3 to 7 area in my drafts. Because once you get round 8, round 9, round 10, you're just kind of backfilling your roster. But the meat and potatoes I notice mostly are, do you want to be left in an awkward decision point rounds 3 to 7?
100%. And that's why I think going wide receiver out the gate gives you the flexibility. If you really want Kyron Williams round 3, you can go get Kyron round 3. If you really want Kelce round 4, you can afford to go get Kelce round 4. Like, it just gives you the flexibility in the middle rounds. Whereas if like you eat your dessert early and you go and you start off with Breece Hall and Jonathan Taylor or Christian McCaffrey to Von Achan, then no matter what, you are the guy that has to take Terry McLaurin at the 4-5 turn, And it's funny that you mentioned CMC at 1, because this is a spot that I have such a difficult time with. Whenever drafts first opened this offseason, about 5 drafts in, I realized, okay, I do not want to be the guy having to take wide receivers rounds 4 and 5. Yeah. For that reason, I'm just going to take a wide receiver every chance I get in round 1. So I was taking CeeDee Lamb over Christian McCaffrey. I was going Lamb at 1. Then the pick'ems came out, the projections for CMC. And
they're good.
And the projection has him, and this is something you can go take the lower on if you dare. I'm not. At 1,700 total yards pretty much, and at about 17 total touchdowns. which you would think, oh, that's crazy. It's hard to project someone to have 100 total yards per game. Then you look at CMC last season and he averaged 120 total yards per game, you know? So it's just so difficult in that Lamb is insane. Lamb is so safe of a pick. You know what I mean?
Such a good pick.
Exactly. With Christian McCaffrey, you have to swallow the pill that he's a 28-year-old running back coming off the most touches in the NFL. And historically speaking, we've seen the running back age cliff either hit RBs at 26 or 28. Really, those are like the two tiers where you have the most probability of falling off. So you have to swallow that pill with McCaffrey. Whereas CeeDee Lamb's staring at you in the face, and CeeDee Lamb's
25-year-old prime receiver.
Exactly. In an offense that projects to score a ton of points where you have absolutely no competition, it's like, hey, you can take me in worst case scenario, and I mean worst case scenario, unless I get hurt on wide receiver 10. Like, you know what I mean?
I don't even see wide receiver 10 as a floor.
Oh, but I'm just going worst case. Lance is starting by week 5.
Okay, fair. Yeah. If Dak is out, like, assuming Dak's health, though, like this target concentration in that offense, the overall projection of the offense, like I'll tell you right now, like, so with CeeDee Lamb, obviously at the start of the year, Mike McCarthy calling the shots right now. Now the new play caller, obviously Kellen Moore left in the offseason. People were kind of questioning what the offensive complexion would look like. And at the start of the year, they just simply were not scoring touchdowns in the red zone. I think that was the biggest talking point on ESPN. Oh, the Cowboys' red zone offense is so bad. It's historically inefficient. And then by week 6, going into the bye, that's kind of when they figured stuff out, right? So I actually got the splits after the bye week, once the Cowboys' offense fully settled in, once Mike McCarthy found his groove as a play caller, CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott being trusted as the engine of the offense. CeeDee Lamb took another step. Like, we're looking at a guy that down the stretch last, I believe, 8 or 9 games, 32% target share, 27.8 PPR points per game, 2.96 yards per route run, 40% receiving yards market share. Like, 40% receiving yards market share on an offense that was a top 5 offense in the league is how you get to 27.8 PPR points per game. And looking at the offense, not much else has changed. So I don't necessarily think we should be, worried about the downside case of CeeDee Lamb, barring an injury to Dak Prescott. Because quite frankly, as much as I like Jake Ferguson, as much as I like Brandon Cooks, as much as I like Jalen Tolbert, this is the most concentrated top offense in the league.
We'll talk about Brandon Cooks in a second because I think he's a very interesting guy to figure out. But with the decision of Lamb versus CMC, essentially my take was, I'm going to go Lamb. You have upside. You essentially have no downside. And it's easier to draft your team in the middle rounds.
Yeah.
But then I saw the projections with Christian McCaffrey. And at the time, I had like 0.5%, something nuts, CMC. And I went, oh, dear God, I may have just made the worst mistake of my entire life. If Christian McCaffrey stays healthy and is CMC, I don't have a shot to win. I should just delete the app and not look at it. So I started taking CMC, and I'm up to 3% Christian McCaffrey. But
let me see where I'm at right now, because I do believe I've been getting a decent. But to be fair, I haven't gotten a lot of 101s overall. But let me just see where I'm at in terms of CMC exposure, running backs.
And I'll say real quick, if you're in a regular redraft league with your college buddies, you obviously go McCaffrey at 1 just because it's easy to find wide receiver value.
APR.
Yeah, but it's just difficult on Underdog where it's like, okay, yeah, you don't want to be the guy taking wide receivers middle round on Underdog.
No, absolutely not. And I think that's a good point for those watching, is that obviously your home league ADP will differ from Underdog. Like Underdog, you're not going to see Tank Dell go in the 3rd round of your home league ADP. You're not going to see Zay Flowers go in the 3rd round. You're not going to see so many, like you just mentioned, maybe Terry McLaurin goes because he's a name value, but even like I like Jaden Reed a ton. You mentioned the Packers receiver core. I like Jaden Reed as the number 1 in that core. You have to take him in round 5 on Underdog. You could probably get him round 7 or 8 on your ESPN, Sleeper's a little sharper, but ESPN and Yahoo are specifically the ones I'm looking at.
Yeah, that's what I saw. ESPN, you can get Zay Flowers round 6.
Yeah.
But real quick, so going back to Dallas, let me just pull up the projections that you have right now for this offense. This is, I want to say, the 6th best offensive projection that you have behind San Francisco, Detroit, KC, Miami, Buffalo, Cincinnati, Baltimore. So I'm sorry, it's the 8th. But regardless, it's supposed to be a phenomenal offense.
Yeah.
You have Lamb, Ferguson, Cooks, don't talk to me about Jalen Tolbert. If you try to sell me on Jalen Tolbert, it's just cowboy homerism.
17th round. I'm mixing it in. 17th round.
Let me pull up. I've been tracking all this stuff for my draft guide. Let me get what we have right now for the 3-year fall off that you've had from Brandon Cooks, because the Brandon Cooks fall off is something to admire. Brandon Cooks 2 years ago in 2021, 2.1 yards per route run. And 2022, 1.7. Bad.
1.2 last year, right?
You have 1.3 last season. Obnoxiously bad. Maybe shouldn't even be running routes this season. And Brandon Cooks, like back whenever I first started playing Dynasty in 2014, I maybe set up a Twitter account and made Brandon Cooks my profile pick. I freaking love this dude. At least I did back when he was in New Orleans. I did back when he was in New England. One of my favorite guys to historically root for. But if you look at the fact he's going into year 10, we've seen the efficiency almost get cut in half. You know what I mean? And he was one of the least efficient receivers in the NFL. I'm sitting here going, this guy he's a nothing burger for this next season, but the situation's so damn good.
Yeah, that's the issue. Again, this is a guy that I wouldn't be taking in your redraft lineup leagues, but I am absolutely taking in best ball at his current valuation. Tell me this, another older receiver that was really good in fantasy for the last few years. The last 5 years before this past season, that showed regression this year in a comparatively worse offense with more target competition. I'm talking about Tyler Lockett. What is the difference in projection other than the fact that the Cowboys will be a better offense between Tyler Lockett and Brandon Cooks this upcoming year?
It is true. Lockett's fallen from 2.5 to 1.9 to 1.7 yards per run over the past 3 seasons. So yeah, Lockett is getting worse
we'll
as well.
Sorry. I figured that would happen.
No worries, my guy. We'll just keep going. But the thing with Lockett is, I don't know. I mean, it's a really good question. Let me look at the difference that you have with prices here. Lockett going wide receiver 51. Cooks going wide receiver 56. You're right. You do have the Cowboys projecting out at 24.5 points per game, essentially, or 24.3 points per game. You have Seattle at about 22.3, so 2 points per game fewer for the Seattle offense. You do have in Seattle 2 significant weapons. In Dallas, you have 1. It's a really good question. I think that it's interesting pinned that way. And the thing is, I have been drafting Lockett, but I haven't been drafting Brandon Cooks. So maybe this is something I have to reevaluate. Let me see how many drafts I've taken these guys in.
Camera should be back.
I have Lockett in 13% and Cooks in 4.1%.
Yeah, let me see, because I've been upping my Brandon Cooks exposure. Again, I agree with you that it's more than likely he's over the hill, but at the same time, how many times can we say, like you said, a top 10 projected offense in a best ball format has maybe their second or third target going in the 110, 120 range? It's tough. It's tough.
I don't know. It's a really interesting point. Now,
well, and going back, you mentioned Jalen Tolbert. So you mentioned the fall off of Brandon Cooks. Again, I'm not going to sit here and say Jalen Tolbert is a crystal clear projection. But with the risk that Brandon Cooks may or may not be over the hill, you're getting a potential player that's been talked about as a 3 wide receiver set player already, the other outside wide receiver in Dallas.
It's fine, my guy. Don't worry about it.
Here, you know what? Let me just do this.
People are just going to be listening pretty much audio only, though. So we will take it. I'll take it from here for a second. What I want to figure out next is Danny's opinion on some of these offenses that project out to be horrendous, such as New England, Denver, Carolina, the Giants, and Tennessee. Especially, I don't know if this video's come out on the channel, but I recorded a video yesterday. So y'all probably won't have seen it by now.
It's not the greatest, but it is the webcam. Sorry,
it's completely fine. Don't worry about it, my guy. But I'm sorry, what were you saying?
No, I was just saying, basically, with the potential pessimism that Brandon Cooks may be over the hill as a player, Jalen Tolbert, I understand. If he was a 14th, 13th round pick, Ethan, I wouldn't be drafting him. But for a 17th, 18th round flyer, again, Brandon Cook's a guy that's missed some time. Efficiency has gone down. If he's ever relied upon as a 80+% route share type of player in the offense, for your bang for buck at 17th, 18th round, how much worse can you do?
Are there any other wide receivers there that could potentially take that role not named Tolbert?
Not
I just
really. I mean, like Jalen Brooks been getting hyped. They did draft Ryan Flournoy, but by all accounts from Dallas camp, it sounds like that they're confident in Jalen Tolbert. It sounds like he will get the first crack. So for me, it's like you're taking him around like the only other option, like I would say is like, some upside at his spot would be like Odell Beckham Jr., but we've run the song and dance on Odell Beckham Jr. at this point.
I've taken an embarrassing amount of Odell.
I've taken a ton of Odell Beckham Jr. Let me see how much I have. Yeah, the drafts haven't qualified the ones that are still running, but I probably take 4 or 5 more shares on the current drafts I'm in.
Yeah.
So I'm at like 5 or 6% on the ones recorded. I'll probably end up around 10 or 11.
Yeah, I'm at 9% Odell, which I mean doesn't sound like a ton, but for a player not getting drafted in every draft, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's just in that range of drafts. Like we're looking, if I go to rankings, Jalen Tolbert, he's going around wide receiver 89. So in that range, I mean, you're looking at potentially guys like, let me scroll down. Greg Dortch. We don't know about the consistent snaps. I mean, Greg Dortch and Zay Jones literally go back to back. Cool. Let me grab the wide receiver 3/wide receiver 4 on the Cardinals with Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. over a potential top 10 offense with the Cowboys. We mentioned I like Odell, Rondale Moore, whatever. Jalen Hyatt, whatever. Khalif Raymond, I don't mind either. That's decent. Kendrick Bourne's a guy that's probably going to be working behind the Javon Baker, Demario Douglas, obviously Jalen Polk there in the second round. There's just so many question marks in that range and not full-time type of players. Like I think Jalen Tolbert could potentially be. Like I think he's going to walk into the year as the wide receiver 3 on the Cowboys.
Okay, well that's honestly useful and good to know.
Again, not the biggest fan of his talent, hasn't proven much,
Yeah.
but I will say he did look a little bit better down the stretch last year. And for a guy that can potentially get starting level snaps to be in round 17, 18 on a top projected offense, like that's all I'll say on Jalen Tolbert. I don't want to bring out the homerism if that makes sense.
Can I show you some research I just did for a video regarding horrible offenses and the ability for players to produce in them?
Let's hear it.
So, okay, it's not gonna let me share my screen. But anyway, so what I did for this is I looked over the past 10 years. I just got the worst 5 offenses in total points scored every single season. So last year, like the fewest points scored were Carolina, New England, the Giants, the Jets, the Steelers. I did this for running backs, and then I did it for receivers. My initial thought before I actually looked at this data is that running back would be way more reliant on the overall offensive points scored. I thought that if you were in a bottom 5 offense at running back, that you weren't going to be a super strong option. Here, the findings were, I looked at 50 total teams, 50 total running backs. There were 26 RBs. So 52% of those players actually finished in the top 24. So at least you're relevant in fantasy. Then 20% of them finished inside the top 12. So they're RB1s. And then you had 2 guys give you top 5 seasons as well. You had Derrick Henry in 2022. And I want to say Todd Gurley in 2015.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, okay. Well, yeah, the data makes sense. Essentially, running backs have a cap ceiling if they're in a bad offense. Then I pulled up wide receiver, which I didn't know what to expect. I thought wide receiver wouldn't be as much reliant on the offense. Way more. Like to an absurd degree.
Is this PPR or half PPR scoring?
Half PPR.
That makes more sense too.
Yeah. And it was half PPR for running back as well. But looking at this, so essentially going back to the example last year, just to make sure we're on the same page, the 5 teams in terms of the least points scored in the NFL were Carolina, New England, the Giants, the Jets, the Steelers. I just look at their best fantasy wide receiver from a points per game perspective. Adam Thielen, wide receiver 31, Kendrick Bourne 34, Darius Slayton 55, Garrett Wilson 40, George Pickens 33. So with the wide receiver data, you only had 8 out of the 50 guys finishing inside the top 24. So that's 16% in comparison to 52% at running back. Yeah. You had 2 players. This is where it gets nuts. Out of the 50 receivers that were in the league's bottom 5 offenses of their season, only 2 of them finished inside the top 12 at wide receiver. That was Mike Evans in 2014, where he was the wide receiver 12. And let me find the other guy for you. I can't even find the other guy right now. but he was like wide receiver 10. Oh yeah, Jarvis Landry in 2017, wide receiver 10. So you had 0 wide receivers that finished in bottom 5 offenses, giving you a top 9 fantasy football finisher higher.
Yeah.
I had no idea that total points scored mattered that much specifically at wide receiver, where your floor is so freaking low and your ceiling is severely capped. So then I took this over and looked at the bottom 5 projected offenses this season, according to Vegas Sportsbooks. You have New England. This doesn't really apply to New England in regular redraft leagues. Jalen Polk, and none of these guys are going to get drafted. And the thing is, if you draft Jalen Polk, wide receiver like 60 on Underdog, and he's the wide receiver 40, it's a great pick. You know, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I will add context to New England. Obviously, I am a big New England drafter personally. The reason being is that I don't think they'll finish as a top 5 offense. Now, obviously, the projections will point to it. Rookie quarterback, Jacoby Brissett there, unproven pieces. But I will say, Alex Van Pelt coming over. I was the type of guy who had Drake May closer to Caleb Williams in talent than any other quarterback in this class. And I actually do see optimism with that overall wide receiver core. So I personally would be shocked. Again, I understand the projections will point there, but to me, New England is the offense that I would make the bet on. Not necessarily beating the Texans, because obviously the Texans came out of nowhere. We're like a top 10 offense. But if they were to be like the Texans in the regard of completely overplaying their projected hand, it would be New England for me making that bet. Funny enough, we talked about Devontae Adams earlier. I'm assuming the Raiders are probably in the bottom 5 projected, right?
Oh, we'll get through this. Next, you have Denver. Denver doesn't really apply either. The wide receiver 1's Cortland Sutton, wide receiver 49. You can draft Sutton if he finishes the wide receiver 30. It's a good best ball pick. Like, you know what I mean? You don't need the crazy ceiling. The next team's Carolina. Who cares? Legette's going like wide receiver 50. If he finishes wide receiver 30, good best ball pick. None of these guys make sense from a regular redraft perspective. But then you get to a team in the Giants where Malik Neighbors is going at the 2-3 turn. This isn't to mention that Malik Neighbors is a rookie. This isn't to mention that we haven't seen him dominate with a 30% team target share. Maybe it can happen. Obviously, there's no competition. Obviously, phenomenal prospect. But if you look at this data where wide receivers in bottom 5 offenses historically have about a 4% chance to be top 12 names and only a 16% chance to be top 24 guys. And Malik Neighbors is going at the 2-3 turn, ignoring the fact that he's a rookie, ignoring the fact that he's not proven to be an elite level guy at the NFL level yet. I think Malik Neighbors is completely undraftable on Underdog, which I previously did not think until I found this data. I think the only way you draft Neighbors is if you think the Giants are a much better offense than Vegas projects.
And that's probably where I lean, that they'll be a better offense than Vegas projects. Because you mentioned, he has to be the outlier of all outliers. Going 6th overall, second best wide receiver prospect in the FSC prospect model. I would already make the argument he's an outlier in terms of overall talent. And if he is the outlier that I think he is, like, again, a guy that maybe isn't Marvin Harrison Jr., but is the cut below Marvin Harrison Jr. in terms of pure talent, he will carry them past a bottom 5 overall offense. Again, I obviously understand the betting market would, say rookie wide receiver. What's the likelihood he's going to make that type of big impact? But contextually speaking, with the player himself, I just believe in the talent to the point where he won't be in a bottom 5 offense, because he will have I hate making this comparison, but he has an Odell Beckham Jr. like ascension type of fit in this offense. If he is the player that I think he can be, he is the type of talent that can have 1,200 yards, 10 plus touchdowns, and raise the entire complexion of the offense around him.
Well, let me go through some of the insanely talented receivers that were on this list that did not hit top 12 seasons. Garrett Wilson, horrible offense, wide receiver 40.
Yeah.
Garrett Wilson's very good. We can maybe assume that Malik Neighbors is a rookie is as good, but I don't know.
Daniel Jones ain't Zach Wilson, and I was a big Zach Wilson guy.
Garrett Wilson again the season prior. Michael Pittman, wide receiver 29. Brandon Cooks, wide receiver 41 on the Texans 2 years ago.
Yeah.
2021, DJ Moore, wide receiver 27. 2019, McLaurin, wide receiver 28. Not too many good examples there. 2018, Larry Fitzgerald, wide receiver 38. Jordy Nelson, wide receiver 51. 2017, T.Y. Hilton, wide receiver 36. 2016, DeAndre Hopkins, prime DeAndre Hopkins, wide receiver 38. 2015.
What year was that? Sorry, 2016.
Yeah, 26. That was Brock Osweiler.
Gotcha.
2015, Des Bryant, wide receiver 49. 2014, Allen Robinson, wide receiver 38.
Quickly on Dez, by the way, obviously this is a very specific contextual
Yeah.
thing point to add, because obviously, I mean, I'm a big Cowboys fan. You literally see the Dez jersey behind me, but that year, if I remember correctly, he missed like, I want to say 6 or 7 games. He got hurt midway through the year.
This is all points per game.
Oh, points per game. Sorry, my apologies. All right, continue.
Yeah. So, but that just my point is like,
yeah,
Des Bryant was a very good receiver. Prime DeAndre Hopkins was a very good receiver.
for sure.
I mean, prime Eric Decker, prime Mike Evans, prime Allen Robinson, prime T.Y. Hilton. These guys, Jordy Nelson at the end, Larry Fitzgerald at the end. But nonetheless, these guys were great receivers. But when their offense was absolute garbage, it just simply did not matter. They couldn't produce from a fantasy football perspective. So if you think the Giants offense won't be garbage this year, I think go ahead and draft Neighbors. But if you look at where Neighbors is going in ESPN drafts, Neighbors is round 6 pick on ESPN.
Smashing in there.
Love it. I'll take him every day of the week.
Yeah.
But specifically at the 2-3 turn in underdog drafts, I would just rather have Kyron Williams. Even with Kyron downside, but we've seen the upside. He's projects out to be in a good offense, you know?
And I think that's fair. Like, for the record, I do have Malik as more of a mid-third round pick personally in my rankings. But like, for example, I think Josh Allen, like we talked about his ADP. I have him like literally 12 spots ahead of his ADP in my personal rankings. And then, like you said, given the home league nature, I can see, for example, valuing Pacheco, ETN, Henry, Jacobs, Kyron, like you said, those guys over. Like, once I get to the late third round, especially in home leagues, again, you mentioned ESPN ADP. I'm curious to see what sleeper ADP would probably have Malik Neighbors at, because that would probably be more about where, you know, a lot of our home leagues personally, myself, would be aligned with. So I am curious, where does sleeper have him at?
I will try to pull this up. Sleeper ADP. I think if you're looking at sleeper, I don't know. I can't find this at the moment.
Yeah, you're good.
I'd imagine that he's halfway in between the two.
Yeah, probably around there. But regardless, again, I understand there is risk. I will say, though, Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, they're not good options. I'm not going to lie. But with Daniel Jones, at least we saw some type of semblance with a terrible receiver core a couple years ago. I mean, there was a reason, according to the Giants, at least, I didn't think he was ever a $40 million quarterback, but there was a reason at the time why he got the $40 million deal. So I do think having a legitimate wide receiver one in the offense will help him. Again, bigger risk coming off the ACL, but I do feel like he's better comparatively to some of the quarterbacks you mentioned, like Brock Osweiler that 1 year. Obviously with the Cowboys, I believe it was with Kellen Moore. And I mean, I'm not sure. That was probably right after the Kyle Orton days. Was that Matt Castle that was starting the majority of those games?
I don't remember.
Fair enough. But the point being is, although Daniel Jones doesn't project all that well in the current NFL climate, I will say some of those quarterback situations you mentioned were complete disasters. Again, I don't think Daniel Jones is good, but Zach Wilson, Brock Osweiler, Matt Castle in that year, Kellen Moore in that year were probably some of the worst quarterbacks I've ever seen in my life.
So if you had to pick the bottom 5 teams in points scored this season, for these are the wide receivers that don't have top 12 upside, who are your bottom 5 offenses? I'll tell you the bottom 10 Vegas currently projects in order. The worst supposed to be New England, then Denver, Carolina, the Giants, the Titans, the Raiders, the Commanders, the Steelers, New Orleans, and then Minnesota. That's what Vegas projects as the bottom 10. Who do you have as the bottom 5?
Raiders, Commanders feels pretty good to me. Raiders, Commanders, Carolina, you mentioned.
Carolina.
And then what were the other couple you mentioned at the top?
So New England, Denver, Carolina, the Giants, the Titans, the Raiders, Washington, Pittsburgh, New Orleans, Minnesota.
Pittsburgh. I don't think Pittsburgh's going to be very good. So that's 4. And then it's probably going to be one of those teams. Yeah, like the Giants are probably going to be in that mix, although like they have a little bit more upside, I would say, given Malik Neighbors there. I would say probably if we're looking down the board there, I mentioned New Orleans. I'm trying to think of the other teams that would be in that range. Like, this is also acknowledging too that some teams are like very, very dependent on one player staying healthy. A la the Jets, if Aaron Rodgers were to go down, they would be down there. Obviously, I'm not going to make that bet because he's healthy, but they're a team that could potentially work their way down there. Denver, a little bit more uncertain, but like you said, nobody's really drafting a lot of the guys anyways. Tennessee's the one I would disagree on too, because I think just adding Brian Callahan alone is going to raise the complexion of that offense. I also really like the wide receivers and Will Levis to potentially take a leap. So I probably wouldn't categorize them down there. Yeah, like I think you pretty much named a couple of the names that probably should finish in that range, but I'm just trying to think if there's any team that would be missing off of that list that we're not going through.
So, but my takeaway from this is
Yeah,
what I'm saying about Malik Neighbors, you would essentially say the same thing about Devontae Adams, unless
pretty
Adams is
much.
gone.
Pretty
Okay.
much. Now, I think Devontae Adams' floor is very high given the volume, but you said finishing as a top 12 wide receiver. I'd be taking the bet on the rookie young potential.
No worries, my guy.
I would bet on the young appreciating talent of Malik Neighbors rather than the potential downfall that we've already saw evidence of from Adams this past year. Personally, I do have Malik Neighbors one spot higher than Devontae Adams.
Okay. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about that maybe we didn't cover?
Not much other than the fact that with camera problems, slight speaking issues, we were able to get through a full hour fully. So appreciate you for bringing me on. Again, talking best ball. We'll be talking a whole lot more come August. So can't wait for that meetup. Obviously, we'll be taking our streets to an actual league, man. We've been talking a lot of back and forth, this and that, but when the money's on the table, when all of us are in the league, we'll see who the true Flock Fantasy champion is.
I'm excited. Do you have any ideas for potential, like, other than like we could do a cash thing, but I don't think that would be as fun as like if we could come up with a punishment for the last place team
Yeah.
and a reward for the first place team. Do you have any ideas?
I can't think off of name. Now, what would be something that obviously again, it would probably have to be a remote punishment unless we just all met up and like just started throwing eggs at someone, which I don't think is probably reasonable.
I mean,
Uh
we can. What we need to do is we need to do every once in a while on Instagram Reels. I'll see like, oh, this guy lost his fantasy football league, so he had to do this. I've seen like a guy that was in
yeah.
a ballerina show. I've seen someone that had to enter in a wrestling tournament in his like singlet said like I suck at fantasy football, stuff like that. We need to come up with something like that for the loser.
I've heard one where it's like somebody has to perform a stand-up set with no notes or no prep. They just got to walk up there and try to make people laugh. I've seen that one. I've seen stuff like, oh, like obviously, everybody knows like the IHOP challenge. That's pretty basic overall.
Yeah,
Everybody knows that. I've seen more and more where people have gotten shot by freaking paintballs. Like I've seen like it varies so much, which is the beauty of fantasy football. It's like
yeah.
there's different types of punishments that are different scales of like different punishment. If you, that made no sense, but basically, like some are physical, some are emotional, some
See,
are embarrassing. Like you just got to find the one that applies to your group the most.
my thought is specifically because we're going to be doing a bunch of content around the league. It should be embarrassing and good content at the same time. So that's why I'm saying like the ballerina show, like imagine
Yeah.
Corey up there with like a bunch of like 12-year-old girls and he's wearing a tutu and we get to record him doing that dance and then put it online. That would be pretty good. Like, you know what I mean?
The one I was thinking too, maybe like they have to make like a 5 to 10 minute apology video for saying that they suck at fantasy football for anybody who took their advice.
Oh, that is a good one. They have to upload on their YouTube channel talking admitting how bad they are at fantasy football. And if anybody followed them over the past year, that is a good one. That's hilarious.
I just thought about it up the dome. You mentioned the league channel posting a video. I'm like, holy fuck, like that would actually click.
Yeah, that'd be really good. Maybe we can come up with and we need to also
The winner.
come up with something good for the winner.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm down.
Awesome. But appreciate you, my guy.
Appreciate having
Excited
me on.
for August.
Amen. Amen. Hopefully everybody enjoyed us. Just talking ball at the end of the day. That's what it comes down to. We can make show notes. We can talk about different topics, but at the end of the day, we're just all some lads talking some ball.
Definitely. I just want to pick your brain, but appreciate you.
Appreciate you, bro. Take care.